Um, Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, it gives me great pleasure in introducing William Lourens. William Lourens heads up risk forensics and continuity management at Fairhead's Benefit Services. I think we're in for a very interesting presentation. I've had a bit of a preview. Williams was with the in the Defence Force for about 17 years. Also the Inspector General for SANDF, and has studied at UNISA as well as at UCT, and went into private sector in 2007, but has years and years of experience, both as I say, as the Inspector General in SADNF, as well as now private sector. So we're in for some interesting things, interesting presentation. And yeah, thank you very much, William. I just thought before we start as well, the slides will be made available. We are recording the session, so we normally do a write-up afterwards on the session, and the recording will be available as well. But thank you very much for those who've joined us, and you'll be on mute, everyone, until the end of the presentation. But in the meantime, you can type in comments in the chat group if you want to, and we'll get to questions at the end for William. So over to you, William. Thank you very much for doing this info sharing for us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yes, thank you for inviting me over. I'm not really the biggest marketing individual, and I'm not great at selling things, but I do enjoy information sharing. So I therefore welcome the opportunity just to be able to give you some insight in terms of how we look at fraud management at Fairheads, and just give you a bit of an insight in terms of what is important to us, where our focuses are. I do enjoy the information sharing sessions. I think you can continue to do the same thing incorrectly until you actually put yourself out there and have a discussion with other individuals. So yeah, I do always value these opportunities to share and obviously learn from each other. So I'm going to share my screen quickly.
We can see your screen. Thanks, William.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so we have an hour. The topic for today is obviously forensic management in the umbrella trust beneficiary fund environment. So I would like to do a practical walkthrough of fraud prevention, both internal and external, addressing need, opportunity, and justification. Looking at the utilization of polygraphing, we really do use Polygraph extensively in our company. So I think it might be a good opportunity just to share that and our experiences around the polygraphing environment with you. And if we have some time, we can go through fraud detection, a couple of aspects that we have in around fraud detection, and a little bit of fraud management, and then perhaps just put a few ideas out around fraud, whether it's just a cost to company, or if you can actually manage it to an extent within your business. What is your approach to that? So the layout of my presentation will just be to give you a little bit of background in terms of what I'm talking from, where I'm coming from, what is Fairheads about. So what are umbrella trusts and beneficiary funds? A little bit around workforce management. That to me is a very important aspect. You're only as strong as your workforce. You can develop whatever you want to develop, but you're never going to get it properly implemented and executed if you do not have the right individuals on board. When you want to safeguard your company, I think that is pretty much the environment in which you need to start focusing. It's your workforce management. It's also critical, obviously, to fraud prevention and detection and management. So I'll then just go through some fraud prevention aspects in terms of what we're doing, what we look at, what our focuses are. Try and share maybe a few examples of issues that we've had in the past. I think that's always quite handy when you have a practical example for something. I'll discuss polygraph utilization, all the environments in which we use it. Depending on the time, we can go into a little more depth there. briefly go through detection, management, and the cost to company. Jonathan did introduce me, so maybe just to give you a slight bit of background. I was still one of those fortunate or unfortunate individuals that had to do conscription, and we were sent off, put in trains, and posted off to the Defence Force. So you either had to swim or sink there, and I decided I'd rather have a swim at it, and worked my way up through the ranks, managed to study through the Defence Force, great opportunities there. And then I got involved in the Inspector General, which really was quite a dynamic organization, gave us a huge amount of exposure to so many different fields. And in 2007, I moved over into the private sector, joined Fairheads, and I've been with them for 15 years, really enjoying the company. It's a great company to work for, great individuals, doing a lot of good into the wider community. So just a bit about the company. So Fairheads is South Africa's leading independent administrator and service provider to the retirement and fiduciary industries. The administration of beneficiary funds and umbrella trusts has been Fairheads' core business for more than 30 years, and we have evolved to include tracing services, unclaimed benefits, legacy umbrella trust products, as well as pension-back lending. It started as a small company. It was a small accounting firm actually many years back, and then it developed into some private wealth. And from there, with a partnership with Alexander Forbes, the umbrella trust concept was developed, and that absolutely flew. The company eventually started their own investment house, and later then rather decided to focus just on the core business of umbrella trust administration, and then later beneficiary fund administration. But as time goes by, you need to obviously develop and service your clients more, and so we got involved in tracing, as well as the unclaimed benefits environment. We developed a legacy trust as well, so that we can obviously service our clients better, that you do not need to terminate your sub-trust at age of majority, that you can actually invest post age of majority. And then also we looked at pension-back lending, which is also an interesting field to get involved in. Certain individuals that are obviously struggling can make loans against their actual pension fund. So it is then obviously backed by the pension fund. That's just to give you a little idea of the environment in that we're working. What I'd like to put forward is also the value statement that's been at Fairheads, and it is core to everything that we do. So it states that we act respectfully, doing the right thing for the right reason to ensure our clients are safe with us. So if you take that to heart and you are in the forensic environment, ensuring that our clients are safe with us is absolutely a passion of mine, and that's why we developed our fraud and prevention framework that I'm going to try and share a little bit with you. So the safe management of funds is key to our value proposition, with the knowledge that we are fulfilling an important role in society in assisting members and clients to have better life and achieve their dreams and aspirations. It sounds like amazing words, but we actually do live it. We really do build into the community. We set up trusts, sub-trusts under our umbrella trust. So we have a number of super funds that we already are administering. And under each of these umbrella trusts, we set up for minor beneficiaries. So obviously death benefits are paid out. And if these funds were to be paid to these minors, we're talking about amounts of 30,000 Rand up, that would be gone within a week. What we try to do is to take that funds, invest it for the individual, ensure that they do get an education, and so by obviously building into the community, ensure that the individual has a proper chance at life. So it's quite nice when you have a value statement and you feel that you can live it. So our demographics is throughout South Africa. We also have cross borders into Namibia, as well as our neighboring countries. Sorry, I'm struggling a bit with the hay fever, the change of season. It's, I would say, a very large portion of these sub-trusts that we do set up are for your less fortunate individuals into your less fortunate or less affluent communities. So we set up trusts from 10,000 Rand for a child up to, you know, a couple of million. It all depends. But as I said, the majority is obviously in your less fortunate environments. So as I was stating, workforce management is kind of quite key. It's a passion for me. If you want to develop any kind of fraud prevention environment, it's got to start with your actual people. You've got to have focus in terms of who you're bringing on board and what are they adding to your organization. Some of the problems that we've had around onboarding and retention of individuals is problem passing. You often find that an individual is obviously found in contravention of any of your policies, and instead of going through your disciplinary environment and then having to face a disciplinary hearing and most likely dismissing the individual, having to go through the whole CCMA environment, I find that a lot of companies are rather opting to offer the individual an opportunity to resign. And that obviously creates an environment where you're passing that problem on to the next employer without the necessary warnings in place there. So that is also something that we often look out for. And we do quite extensive research into each individual that we do allow into our staff complement. We've also found moving of groups to be a problem. So you might find that an individual from a certain company applies for a position, gets accepted, and pretty soon you're having a number of applications of people from that same company. We've also found that a number of syndicates do tend to work that way as well. So that's also always a red flag, something to look out for when you're finding that you're having groups of individuals moving around. They tend to use that to position themselves within your company. And so you obviously need to safeguard around that. Another aspect that comes through a lot is lying on CVs. We've had people in very serious apply for very top positions, indicating that they have the most amazing qualifications. Some of these qualifications achieved overseas. Italy was one example. And once you start to delve into it and you start digging in and you start contacting these organizations, you find that that's not necessarily accurate and that the individual hasn't necessarily acquired the necessary skill sets. So that's something we find quite a lot. We use polygraphing quite extensively in that environment as well. And you'd be amazed at how many people turn around at the door when they realize they need to be polygraphed on their actual CVs. Hit and run approach, that's something we try to avoid completely. We like to onboard individuals that are going to invest into our company, because we also enjoy investing into individuals. Our staff complement contains a large amount of people with 10, 15, 20 years of experience. So we try to maintain that experience and try to invest in individuals that invest and believe in our company. And try to avoid the environments where you have your knowledge drains. So yeah, workforce management to me is key to preventing. If you don't have the right people on board, you're not going to be very successful. So into fraud prevention, how do we look at that? So we use the basic fraud triangle, need, opportunity, justification. And that we apply to all of our internal individuals, our staff. And then regarding external parties, we look at correct person, correct amount, correct account. It's 6 basic concepts, but you can unpack these to the nth degree. And if you just make sure that you get the basics right, you'll have a very good framework that you can actually apply. So obviously the demographics in our company are vast and diverse, races, genders, different cultures, different belief systems that they come with. Previously, you would often have the same set of belief systems that you could rely on, and that helps you when you're looking at justification. If you can speak to a person's belief system. But nowadays, our staff complement is much more diverse, and one needs to then have a look at more in terms of ethics and correct behavior and having individuals buy into your company. So these are the diverse individuals that you need to obviously work with. If we're having a look at the internal drivers and needs, financial is always going to be your first point of call, first aspect to look at. We're busy with tough economic environments. Everybody is feeling the pinch, and that does lead to individuals becoming a little bit more creative every now and then. So the way in which we address that is obviously making sure that we have market-related salaries. I think it's absolutely important. If you have an individual that's working for you, that you're investing in, that has access to your inherent knowledge, your processes, your procedures, you want to make sure that information is safeguarded, is kept within the company. You don't want an individual to be moving around. So you need to make sure that you are keeping all of your staff properly remunerated and fairly remunerated. Obviously, as far as possible, all companies are taking strain nowadays as well, but that's an aspect that you do need to focus on. As well as EAP programs, it's the employee assistance programs. I think it's really is well worth your effort to invest in proper employee assistance programs. These programs allow individuals mental health consultations, financial consultations, gives them guidance, gives them the necessary support that they need. So we definitely spend quite a bit of time around that. We've invested quite a lot of money into that as well, to have a look at limiting the financial driver for staff that are on board. The other aspect that we've found to be quite an important aspect is collusion, and collusion internally. So the way in which we root that out or prevent that from ever taking root within the company is we polygraph all of our staff on a regular basis. And I'll go a little bit more into that later on in the slides. Segregation of duties, basic concept, but make sure that you are applying that, knowing one individual must be able to move money out of your company. Randomization of task allocation. You need to make sure that an individual does not see the same transaction twice. Once they've touched it and it's moved on, ensure that it goes through to a very different environment, to a very different individual, and make sure that certain individuals cannot forward their documentations to a chosen individual as well. Then you'd find that a compliance assessor would be sending work just to a certain signatory. So yeah, segregation of duties is very important. You really need to spend time on all your processes and procedures, and also automation in all of these environments. So as far as possible, we're dealing with critical things like loading of bank accounts and IDs. We do try to limit the human intervention and try to automate those environments, obviously, as far as possible. Long leave enforcing, it's something that we all know about, never apply in our company. But especially now with work from home environments as well, I think it's a definite focus. It's something that has to happen. You have to have that periods of at least, your 2 weeks where you're handing over, where somebody else is looking at your work. And it also does the individual a lot of good to take the break. Working from home has put a lot of strain on staff, the lack of interactions, etc. So it is necessary for the individual to take those breaks. And then we also perform a large amount of staff checks as well. We constantly monitoring your emails, your calls, your contacts, your family relations, involvements, movement of data, you name it, we check it, we monitor it. And it's not because we don't trust staff, it's just to make sure that we have an environment where everybody is safe and everybody is contributing properly. And this is right through the bank. It's from the CEO right on to the last individual in our contact center. Everybody's treated exactly the same. So if we're looking then at collusion externally. So this is internal staff with external parties. The problems that we've had in the past was with money lending. We all know that financial times are tough, and we understand the incredible interest rates that are put out by money lenders. We've had staff that obviously approached money lenders, and within a question of 2 to 3 months, the amount that they need to recover becomes quite excessive and not manageable, and that makes your staff very, very vulnerable. Once they're in that kind of position, they can then be approached to give information around databases and controls and procedures, etc., within the company. So that is something that we do look at, and obviously our employee assistance programs come in quite handy there. We also have a number of financial assistance schemes that we have for our staff, so that they do not need to approach these external parties. And we also have annual declarations where each staff member has to declare whether they are involved in any of these money lending schemes as well, so that we can manage that environment. Another issue that we had was with saving schemes. So this is the stokvels that individuals start to circulate within your company. You have a group of, say, 10 people that are each pooling an amount per month. And then once a year, an individual would then get that full amount of that is contributed. The problem with that is whenever you're starting to have these saving schemes, there's an amount of money that's moving around. There's individuals that want it, and it starts to become a bit of a manipulation environment. So we've put a complete stop to that. It's not allowed. We can only manage what's within our company, but obviously the saving schemes do take part externally. But then we also have it as part of our annual declaration so that we can know about it and manage it. Also, vendors that come into the companies. We've had a couple of environments where you have people coming to sell the cheeses and the hams and the cold meats, etc. And then it's not very long before they start to offer credit. And after a few months of credit, the individual becomes vulnerable once again. So that is a big no-no. We do not allow any vendors on our premises. The normal environments of drugs, that's something that is quite big. We've been fortunate enough not to have too many incidents in our company, but it is always something you need to be vigilant about. Anybody that is making use of drugs is obviously an incredibly vulnerable individual. And then one that really popped out quite big during the COVID is your alcohol and tobacco sales. I think we all know about that. Everybody knows a friend that works in a wine farm and has access to a certain amount of bottles that can be dropped off at a certain venue. And we obviously need to manage that to make sure that that's not taking place on the premises or when staff are making use of these opportunities that we know about it, and we can put a stop to it where it is. And then something that also needs to be considered is the community in which your staff are living and interacting. We've had a couple of incidents of the last incident I had was an individual was approached at soccer practice by a number of individuals that were also from the community, and they're at this soccer venue, and was asked, obviously, you know, where does he work, what kind of information does he have access to, etc., etc. The individual obviously declined to give any information, but didn't come forward to report that to me, and I obviously picked it up at his next polygraph. And so it's definitely a big no-no. We have a complete zero tolerance to any form of criminal activities or criminal involvements, and there's a huge onus on your staff to actually report these incidents to you so that you can prevent any damage. And should they not prevent it to you, they are then obviously also held responsible for the exposure that the company has. And so this individual was obviously then put through a disciplinary environment. We managed to retain him, and he suffered a demotion as a result of that. So people are always speaking about the zero tolerance to crime, but it's tougher to actually implement it, but it is necessary. You need to have that. In terms of opportunity, within the company, identity theft, I think that is a widespread problem. That really is probably at the core of most things, and you need to build all your necessary checks around ID verifications, third-party verifications, external verifications, internal checklists that need to be put in place. So yeah, identity theft is quite big. And onboarding as well. We obviously, when we're bringing trusts on board, we dealing with communities where we find that we sometimes have unregistered children, or that you have a child that was registered by the mother as well as the father, and then you need to go through quite a process of vetting this. And, onboarding is one of those environments where you need to relax, you need to take the time, you need to do it right, because you're going to be dealing with this individual for quite some time. So we do a lot of third-party verifications, and also polygraphing of family relationships, making sure that we do get all of the necessary links accurate and correct. We've also had environments where neighbors have presented their children as the actual children of the deceased individuals. People are feeling the pinch and they see an opportunity, they're going to come through. So yeah, that is sometimes a challenge, especially when you're dealing with environments where people are not necessarily registering properly with Home Affairs. Deaths are not necessarily always recorded properly with Home Affairs, and then it becomes quite an environment where you do need to dig in and have a look a bit wider. Ad hoc payments. So here we're dealing with an environment where we have to make payments for schooling specifically. That's our focus. And you have to find a balance between protecting the child versus making it too difficult for the individual and encouraging them to then become creative in terms of the type of requests that they put forward. So the way in which you've got to balance it there is that you have either an annual allowance for a year, so it gets paid out to a guardian who has to then take care of the beneficiary, or you can start to manage it a bit more strictly in terms of ensuring that for each and every request that is made, we need to have the necessary invoicing, etc. So that always becomes a bit of a balance between protection as well as helping the individual and not putting unnecessary barriers in terms of being able to service these clients. We're also dealing with guardians, caregivers, as well as even child-headed households. It becomes a reality. And these are the people that we need to deal with, and obviously ensure that we are protecting the beneficiary's interest in terms of where they are housed, who is actually looking after them. One of the bigger aspects, obviously, is termination. So the subtrust is held until the child becomes a major. And then obviously the funds will be paid out to the beneficiary. And it's normally at this stage where you have that separation anxiety of the guardians and the caregivers. They've been receiving incomes, etc., for quite some time. And so we need to watch in terms of how the transition takes place. We've even had environments where I was recently flown up to Port Elizabeth to deal with a case with the MPA there, where the beneficiary disappeared shortly before age of majority. Obviously suspected foul play there in terms of individuals trying to hold on to funds. So yeah, you need to start dealing with the beneficiary at an early age. The more contact you have, the better. Start vetting, start getting IDs from 16 years old already. Start getting the communication going. Let them understand what the trust is so that you can manage that separation anxiety that takes place. Justification. This is obviously the last step in anybody committing fraud. So you have a need, you find an opportunity, and then you need to justify it. So how do we go about that? And for us, the focus is firstly embedding ethics in your corporate DNA. it's going to become part of the way in which you function. It's a non-negotiable. It's built into everything. It's not necessarily a tangible thing that I can tell you this is what ethics is. So it's got to be really embedded into your DNA, and it's going to come from top down. But you also need to make sure that your staff, your low levels, are also buying into it. You're going to live your corporate culture. Especially with work from home, that becomes more of a problem now because you have your staff really spread out. And so you need to make sure that you have regular check-ins, that they understand what the company stands for, what their contribution is. And for us, it's quite easy because we're contributing into society. And you can really show them, the individuals, that they are helping, the children that they are helping. So that becomes a bit easier in our environment. You also have to make it personal, that if fraud is committed within the company, they need to understand what are the implications. Who's the person that's going to get hurt there? Is it the beneficiary, the child, that will be robbed of their future? Because a lot of people tend to justify fraud by saying you have insurance cover, so there's no harm done. And that could not be further from the truth. You don't have cover for 100,000 Rand, 500,000 Rand. You normally have cover only from about R1 million up. So all of the lesser amounts are going to either hit the beneficiary or it's going to hit the company. And either way, it's going to affect the staff as well. So you've got to make it personal. You've got to have your staff buy into what you're doing and understand the implications of fraud throughout the company and who gets harmed and what is the actual effect of fraud within the company. So this is the type of communities that we need to work with. We need to infiltrate. We need to transact with these communities. And these are the children that we need to ensure that their funds are invested properly and that we do look into their future, ensuring that they do get the proper education, that they have the school uniforms, that they have the shoes. We even do road shows where they often take me out on these road shows because I'm more back office and controls and I'm putting all of the necessary blocks in. So they take me out there to make me soft every now and then. We go and have a look at the communities that we serve. We speak to the individuals. And it does allow me to have more of a balanced approach when I do sit down and develop my frameworks. So when we're looking externally, the type of prevention that we do there is obviously ensuring that the correct individual is being paid. So here we have IDs, making sure that you have your clear copies. Don't just accept whatever gets sent to you. We're quite pedantic about that, ensuring that you have your latest issue as well, the latest ID that's coming through. We have ID checklists that get done as a standard on every new document that comes in. It's about I would say it's about a 30-point check that gets done on each ID. Manual checks. If the individual walks in, we also do the ID buddy verifications where we do the backlights and the blue lights. So we do quite a lot of checks around that. There's also system checks built in to make sure that whatever is read in is accurate. And then external verification, that's become quite a focus. A lot of companies have access to Home Affairs databases, and we do definitely make a lot of use of that. So each ID that comes in is also verified, and it also helps you to make sure that you are dealing with the latest issues that come in there. Identifiers in all environments, we do try to also link the ID to an environment that we can have certain identifiers on, such as signatures. Individuals do sign their IDs, so we verify that. Signatures to application documents, etc. Signature verification is obviously a specialized field, so it's not going to become a necessary block, but it can become a flag. So we do train up our staff in terms of identifying signature variations, and then obviously forwarding it up for a review by the forensic departments should be an issue. We do a lot of geographical comparatives as well. So if an individual is staying in a certain area, we need to make sure that the communication is coming from that area. If you're receiving geotagging on any of your photos, etc., or any documentation that's sent through, then it needs to match up with the area in which this individual should be living. If the beneficiary is living in a certain area as well, the invoices, etc., the schooling that is done must also be be to that geographic area. So we do a bit of geographic comparatives. And monitoring of your contact details, making sure it's constant, it lines up to ensure that your beneficiary is staying with the actual guardian that is looking after them or being paid the income. So that's one of the environments that we look at. Security checks, that's an absolute painful thing to have to do, but I think it adds a lot of value to actually talk. Most of what you do is automated, it's third party, it's electronic verification. So this is the one environment in which you're going to actually interact with whoever is presenting themselves to you. So there we have a lot of system data that we would develop certain security checks from. You have to build in randomization, because within 2-3 calls they should be able to get a standard security check down. So there needs to be quite a bit of randomization that's worked in there, as well as false questions. Because that always is an indication if a person is confident, they will identify a false question and put it forward to you. So that is some of the correct individuals. So we spend quite a lot of time around vetting individuals, correct amount. So this is the concept of making sure that it is within annual allowances, looking at reasonability. Is the payment that we are receiving, or the school fees account that has been presented to us, is it a school non-fee schools? Is it a reasonable amount for school fees to be paid? Having a look at the legitimacy of the actual invoice, looking at the registration numbers, confirming that with the Department of Education. Doing all of your normal due diligence checks on your fraudulent invoices. So that's quite a focus that we have. And then also the authorization. So making sure that you're receiving it from the correct party, from a known contact details, and linking all of that together. And then obviously into the correct account. So here we have your third party confirmation. So we often pay to third parties, to schools, etc. And we need to do quite an extensive amount of vetting and to build up a database for these individuals. Ensure that we're paying the right individuals. So if we are paying to a guardian, make sure that that guardian is actually looking after the child. Normal bank verifications, vital, you can't go without it. Make sure that you do it on a regular basis as well. If you haven't used your accounts for an extended period, make sure you redo that verification so we don't pay money out to closed accounts. And an aspect that we also try to put a bit of effort into is account access. So often you receive a banking account from a guardian or from a beneficiary, but then you might find that whoever's looking after them also has access to that account, also knows the PIN numbers, etc. So it's always good just to have that conversation with the beneficiary or whoever is going to be receiving those payments, in terms of who has access to those accounts, so that it goes to the right, it's utilized for the correct purpose and it's not intercepted. All of this we obviously build into our process design. I think this is something that everybody knows. So we go through our standard processes and we take our entire framework. We do build it through from objectives into identifying risks, risk assessments, the mitigation processes that need to take place. We get compliance involved as well to ensure that all of our processes are in line with policies, regulations. We get sign off on those procedures. It goes through until the audit comes into play as well. We do regular testings. We do sampling of all of our transactions. All of that assurance work is done. We have a look at the performance of it. It gets rebuilt into our processes and it gets put forward to identify whether we are achieving our objectives or not. And the circle starts again. So everything that I spoke about now, all of these processes, all of these ideas, all these concepts are embedded then into our procedures that are signed off and regularly risk reviewed. Okay, I see my time is still good. In terms of polygraphing, so we use polygraphing extensively through the company. We literally do hundreds and hundreds of polygraphs. And the environments in which we use polygraphing is in our staffing. So onboarding, any individual that applies to come and work at Fairheads will undergo a polygraph, and the polygraph will be associated with a review questionnaire that is first completed. And you'll be amazed at how many people do turn around at the door when they realize they're going to be polygraphed. It just keeps everybody honest. We also do use it for all promotions. If you're going to have a promotion or you apply for a promotion within our company, you will have a polygraph performed on you as well. We use it extensively for forensics. So yeah, we're having a look at the correct clients, correct claimants. As I say, sometimes you find that individuals aren't necessarily registered properly with Home Affairs. So you might need to polygraph the actual claimant to see that we are dealing with the right individual. We might polygraph family members as well, siblings, just to make sure that we are dealing with a correct claimant before we start the actual forensic investigation. Family relations, we use it there obviously to determine the family relations, to make sure that the children are the actual children of the deceased member. As I say, we've had environments where the neighbor has brought her children forward and said it was the children of the late member. So yeah, we do actually use polygraphing in these environments as well, when we don't necessarily have all of the documentation accurately available to us. And then obviously in forensic interviews, that's the hardcore polygraphing. That's where you sit down, you make things very uncomfortable, and you have your interviews and you have your closing interviews. Yeah, so that is the less pleasant environment in which polygraphing is used, but it's very effective. We use it largely as a risk management tool within the company. So if you want to work from home, for us, there's a definite increased exposure, risk exposure, to have my PCs, my hardware, my assets, and my access to data extended across the Greater Western Cape. It does definitely cause concern, and so before we allow any individual to work from home, they also need to go through and make sure that they have a past polygraph and that the latest polygraph is up to date. We have high-risk areas within the company, and we obviously polygraph more regularly on those environments. So my environment is obviously also quite a high-risk environment because of the environment, everything that we are dealing with. So I do tend to have to do this polygraph myself, at least annually, most times biannually. And although you get used to it, you're always nervous when you go and sit there. But it is a good thing, at least you know the purpose for which it's being utilized, and it's to keep everybody above board and make sure that we don't have any issues in the company. We have rolling strategies, so all staff members are on a rolling strategy, and that gets prioritized, obviously, according to the high-risk areas in which we're using polygraphing. Initially, when you start the polygraphing conversation with anybody, they tend to be apprehensive. I think it does create a lot of nervousness for people, but the more you get to use this tool and the more you are exposed to the tool and you understand the value that it adds, and your staff also starts to buy into it, it becomes a very handy tool to use, a very effective tool to use. But you obviously do need to apply it with caution throughout the company. You need to make sure that you do deal with your staff in the correct manner. So we have approached a couple of legal firms. We've got a couple of legal opinions in terms of how we utilize polygraphing throughout the company. It has also been included into our employment contracts, so that it is a legal avenue for us to explore and to utilize within the company. So we always do tend to act ethically and make sure that we are above board in terms of all of our approaches and utilizations of these tools. Something to consider when you're looking at polygraphing is the selection of service providers. So yeah, you do need to make sure that the individuals are correctly registered, and that they're also conducive to the purpose of the examination that's going to be utilized. A while back we had two very large Afrikaans individuals that had come from the SAPS environment, and everybody seemed to be a bit intimidated by these two individuals when they started the polygraphing. And they said that they would rather prefer to be polygraphed by a female examiner. I then went and got a female examiner, and she turned out to be quite a lot more extreme than the actual SAPS members, and now they are regarded as the teddy bears, and they are very widely welcomed within our company to do polygraphs. So yeah, you need to have a look at the service provider that you're choosing, that the individual also suits the purpose for which you're doing the examinations. If you're doing it with your staff, you want to make sure you have a softer hand. If you're doing it for a forensic environment, make sure you get the more tougher end of the providers. You always need to make sure that you're treating your individuals with respect, and that they're handled with dignity throughout the process as well. Interpreters, that's always a consideration, especially when we're doing cross-border polygraphing. You need to make sure that you get the correct language interpreters there, and then you need to really concentrate around your formulation of your questions, because a certain question posed in a certain manner can mean something completely different in a different language. So when you're dealing with interpreters, yeah, you need to get language specialists involved in the formalization of your questions as well. Something to consider is the medication. Are your staff on any form of medication before they are called in for their tests? We generally find that medication is not a big issue to the staff, because you normally would determine your baseline and work from a baseline. So the individual will be measured according to their current stress levels, and you'd look at fluctuations above that, the stress levels. So we haven't had any real issues with individuals being on medication and affecting it negatively. Externally, we have had some issues with people arriving at the examination venue after taking cannabis, which does tend to relax the individual and make them less, how should I put it, the results are not as extreme, so it's very reduced and you're not getting the proper feedback. So then we would obviously have to send that individual away and reschedule. Reporting is absolutely important in terms of the information that you get back from your polygraphing. Also, when you're dealing with your staff, you need to make sure that they get that reporting back as soon as possible. They need to have it that evening. So I always insist that my examiners burn the midnight oil. I want to know the results the same day, so that I can get it through to my staff, that they can relax as well. And that also comes in terms of treating the individual with respect, and understanding that it is a tool, but we want to use it in the proper form and fashion. So that is the use of polygraphing. If I just speak quickly through some detection that we have, we've got whistleblowing, we've got transactional testing, procedural controls, database checks. Whistleblowing is an interesting one. People do a lot of effort there to have all these avenues, but if people do not trust your whistleblowing process, they're not going to make use of it. I've reported to a number of companies making use of their whistleblowing facilities, and I've never been contacted back. And that which I've reported to them was quite serious information. So then you start to doubt the effectiveness of whistleblowing. So it's only as good as it's managed, and also your individual needs to be comfortable enough to come forward and make use of this whistleblowing facility. If we are enforcing polygraphing and the individual knows that there is a definite onus on them to make use of a whistleblowing facility, we need to make sure that when they do come to us and blow the whistle, that we do protect their environment as far as we possibly can. We do extensive transactional testing, and a lot of issues come out through procedures. We build our control frameworks into the actual procedures. We train up our signatories, we train up our staff to identify IDs, to identify invoices that are coming through, to definitely be the gatekeepers for us. So our staff are often our biggest gatekeepers for us. We do extensive database checks as well. We run a lot of data through. That's an interesting environment. It's easy to run a script. It's very difficult to deal with what you find and to then go and clear out all of those exceptions. So yeah, that is quite a time-consuming environment. So you need to apply that carefully within the company. In terms of fraud management, focus is always on having a claimant. You can't start if you don't have the claimant, so there's often a lot of tracing and vetting involved in that process. And then often the discussion has to be around a loss suffered. So once you have a claimant, make sure that there is an actual loss suffered. Sometimes you might find that the individual is putting forward that he never received any value from that. But if you do start analyzing it, you might find that the payments went to the guardian who did then supply certain certain needs would have been fulfilled. So you always need to actually have a look that there was a definite loss suffered and who suffered that specific loss. We then go into a preliminary investigation. So if we have a claimant and the loss was suffered, we go through the preliminary investigation, and part of that preliminary investigation is definitely a in-detailed look at our control adequacy and effectiveness. And that would then be fed back into our operational environment and go through our processes and procedures and have them updated as soon as possible. All of this then gets sent through to our fraud committee. A fraud committee would obviously deal with the preliminary investigation, and from there we would have a discussion around whether we should go forward and start the full investigation, case registration, and then into prosecution. Once again, the approach, if you're going to have a zero tolerance, you need to be able to say that we are committed to pushing through and actually going through the full investigation, case registration, as well as prosecution. Prosecution is never going to be quick, it's never going to be easy. You're going to have to hold hands, you're going to have to lead the individual, you're going to have to do a lot of the investigations for these people. But yeah, if you want to have a zero tolerance to crime, you're going to have to be able to go the full length. Cost to company, and here I'll kind of end off quickly, is just all companies are affected by fraud. Whether you understand and know the quantum thereof depends on the amount of detection that you're doing. How you deal with it determines whether you regard it just as a cost to company or whether you want to actually try and be a bit proactive. And we intend to try to be as proactive as we can, and that's why we put a lot of effort into our fraud prevention, ensuring correct staff, ensuring that our processes and our procedures are updated. And you start to reap the rewards of that eventually. You'll note that your prevented versus perpetrated fraud will definitely be leaning towards a majority of prevented cases and a limited amount of perpetrated cases. Your rand value starts to come down, so your actual exposure, your loss exposure start to decrease considerably. So most of the effort needs to go into fraud prevention. Recovery, we do push it, but it's once the money is out of the door, it's very difficult to actually get any form of recovery back there. Hence, I say prevention is better than cure. But if you're going to have a zero tolerance to crime, you need to obviously explore those avenues as well. You're going to have to register these individuals. You're going to have to do the monthly follow-ups to try and make the recoveries. Prosecution, always a difficult environment, so it is something that you have to get involved in. Often a good place to get specialists involved as well. Prosecution is a very tricky environment, as you would all know. So yes, if you want to have a zero tolerance to crime, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. You need to have hard conversations, and you need to make sure that you're willing to follow through. I've often had a conversation with forensic departments. You phone them in, and the first thing they tell you is that they have a zero tolerance to crime. And as you start to discuss the case, they're looking at ways of justifying the claimants or the perpetrator's actions, which is kind of counterintuitive and defeats the object. So if you're going to have a zero tolerance, that is what you need to apply to your company. And that is my presentation. That was quite a ramble off. I'll give some time for questions. Other than that, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak.
Yeah, thank you very much, William. That was good. I see we've still got a few minutes. There are a few questions which I'm going to read to you that are in the chat group, and then after that we'll open the floor to any other questions that people have got. So there's a question here from from Marius. What type of indicators have you found may be good indicators to be early warning indicators that an employee may have reached a point where they are the high likelihood of to rationalize fraud, corruption activities, like for example, low morale, constant complaints of low pay, financial pressures? And a second part of that question, what training have you found is most effective to educate colleagues to do proper budgeting and finance management of their personal finance?
That's quite a question. Very, very relevant.
So it's really what are the early warning indicators, and how do you educate people to try and manage their finances?
Yes, I think this is the question of a happy employee versus a disgruntled employee. If anybody is starting to struggle financially, you'll pick it up in terms of their moods and the way in which they're reacting, their approaches to taking on work, and that's where we have a lot of smaller groups, and you have managers that have, say, 6 or 7 individuals below them. So you have to have some kind of a staggered group that they have reporting that there is people that are regularly monitoring them in terms of their behavior, their outputs, all of those sick leaves. That always becomes quite an indicator as well. So you pick it up, it becomes a bit of a disgruntled employee, and they will be talking about it to their fellow staff. You just need to make sure that you have your ears on the ground as well, that your managers are involved and are having regular conversations, regular check-ins with everybody, so that you can pick up on those signs. How to deal with it? Difficult, because you don't necessarily want to have your manager getting involved with your financial environment, and that's why we tend to outsource that a lot in terms of your employee assistance programs, so that we make it available to them. But you have to have HR must be involved. They have to sell this properly to the people. People need to be aware of what is available to them. So if you are feeling pressures, make sure that you can go and speak to a psychiatrist, a psychologist. If you are experiencing the financial pressures, be able to come forward and say, listen, I'm struggling. And then we have programs where we do send them through the more basic. So we often dealing here with your lower income environments. So they would have the more basic budgeting environments and debt consolidation conversations. But it's nicer to get a professional involved there. There's a lot of companies that specialize in that. I think you'd get more value from that.
Yeah, thanks, William. Justin Bauer asks, do you do the polygraphing in-house, or do you use an external service provider?
I'd love to do it myself. I think it's a very, very interesting environment, but no, we use external service providers. So we go through vetting processes, and we have a couple of service providers that we use for different purposes. Say if it's going to be just a normal risk management tool, then we have your softer approach individuals. So we go through quite an extensive process of vetting them, having a look at their qualifications, their registrations. It's mostly with American polygraphing associations. There are some local boards as well, which they register, that you can also follow up on. Looking at the calibration of the equipment, etc., becomes quite a thing. But you need to make sure that if you are going to be applying or allowing these individuals into your company, that they are obviously accurate. But yeah, I wouldn't. Our company is not big enough at this stage to do that and to have a dedicated individual. But I think, if you are a larger concern, I would definitely invest in perhaps training up individuals.
Yeah, thanks. Andre Havenka asks, how do you deal with the resistance to polygraphing of staff, contractors, members of the public? And another part of the question, to what extent are polygraph results accepted in the CCMA or court cases?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question. And whenever you start the conversation around polygraphing, people are going to be incredibly resistant to it. So therefore, you need to explain the purpose of the polygraph, and also weigh up the alternatives to that. So I can either take an individual and I can do a complete investigation on them. We can do lifestyle audits. You can do all of that, which is incredibly invasive. And it will take a huge amount of time, or we can sit down and do an hour-long polygraph. You answer 4 questions to me, and we know that you're above board. So it's a win-win for both sides there. It's an easier way of getting the red flag up, and that's where you need to have the discussions with your staff, and you need to have them buy into what is the principle of it. So if somebody, it's easier to sell it when there is a need for it. So if an individual needs it for a promotion, they're going to be more open to the idea of it. If they need it to work from home, they're going to be more open to the idea of it. But you also need to sell it from a protection of the company point of view as well. So it's not a personal thing. It's a risk management tool that you're utilizing. The conversation around the, and that always comes up, you know, whether you can, the standing, how much standing does the polygraph results actually have in a court of law? And yes, you cannot dismiss, you cannot put it forward as standalone evidence. It's a supportive evidence. And the way in which you normally use it is a red flag. So in a risk management environment, we use polygraphing to put up the red flag and say, right, here's an issue, here's an indicator. And then you obviously need to then go and do all the harder work, the digging in, the investigation, to have a look at why is that flag going up. And you need to have the two together. Often you would find that you have a polygraph result, and it takes you quite some time before you're actually able to dig into it and figure out, you know, why are we getting that kind of result. But it is normally a supportive evidence.
Yeah, thanks. And last question, it's on the chat group from Justin Bauer. What happens to an existing staff member if they fail a polygraph?
Okay, yeah, we have had that. So as I say, the polygraph then is it's the red flag that goes up. It's also the pre-requirement for certain working in certain environments, and so obviously that individual then gets removed from those environments because you need to have a past polygraph to be able to work in those certain environments, work from home. And following that, you would have your interview with the individual, and you'd have to discuss, you know, why are you failing the specific question? And often you can find that they have an underlying issue to it. They might have been approached by somebody at a soccer field, and so that obviously is causing a lot of anxiety, causing the fear, which then obviously triggers the negative result. And then you can take that and build it into a second polygraph, which we normally go through. So then we would say, in the absence of what has been stated, and then ask the question. And that normally clears out the issue, because then the individual has come forward and given you the information that is obviously blocking them from going through. If that doesn't clear it out, obviously a full investigation, and then we have to start having a look at, you know, who we're dealing with and why is that taking place.
Last question, do you have an alternative to a polygraph if a member resists?
As I say, we build it into our contracting. So it's part of your onboarding, and it's part of the onboarding requirements. And it's also then built into our contracts as well. So it's a legal requirement to work. And we obviously went through an environment where we got the necessary legal opinions in terms of that. So if you suppose you can have an environment where a staff would completely resist, but then the staff would be limited in terms of their application. And obviously you have to manage those results then in that environment.
Okay. I think everyone can unmute themselves. So if you'd like to put your hand up, we can then take questions from the floor. If anyone's got any questions for William. I don't see any hands up. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating, William. Sheesh, I don't think a polygraph tests at all. You know, so
the initial
although I have, yeah, carry on.
The initial conversation you have with everybody when you start saying, you know, we need to do polygraphing, it's very negative. You know, they're going to find 100 different reasons why they shouldn't have to do the polygraph, or how it can go wrong or it doesn't have legal standing. But 99% of our staff have gone through it, and after the first experience with it, they see the tool. You start to explain it to them, you start discussing polygraphing, it becomes a bit more of a real thing to them. You know, what type of equipment is going to be on you, the chest strap that's on, the stomach movement, the blood pressure cast on the finger monitor for sweat, etc. The pad that you sit on to test your movement. You know, as you get nervous, you clench. So yeah,
sounds like the electric chair.
That's it. So once you can have these conversations and you can laugh about it, and you can kind of look at it, and you can get the people to go through and see the value that you really have, the way in which it protects your company, and the ease with which you can put up that red flag and know where your problems are lying. It definitely keeps everybody honest. It's a huge deterrent, and it keeps everybody honest.
So can we use it for some of our politicians, or will they break the machine?
I'm not sure which service provider I'd get involved there, but yeah, that could be quite an environment to use it, I think.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
There's a question here. Justin, go for it.
Thank you. You know, with some of your staff members that you test like maybe once a year, what are some of the typical questions that you ask them?
Okay. Questions is quite an important aspect. You can only question on one theme. So you can't ask a number of random questions. So you have to take one theme, and it might be around data security. So you would ask the individual, perhaps, have you committed fraud within the company? And the second question might be a test question that you then ask to have you gained financially from committing fraud. Okay. So you ask a question, you get a test question, that those two then corroborate each other. And then follow through with maybe, you know, are you involved in this syndicated environment, or are you aware of anybody else in the company that is committing fraud? So you have to have a central theme that you ask. And you also do need to have test questions to test each other as well there with that. So when the individual comes and sits down, also they're going to get asked a number of questions. You know, these are all just to calibrate the system and to sort of find a baseline. So they're going to be asked about, you know, is the light on? Are you sitting on chairs? The biggest concern that staff normally have is questions around, have you stolen tea, coffee? When we started polygraphing, the amount of, we used to have issues with teaspoons and cups disappearing, you know, milk going out, and since you're polygraphing, that doesn't happen anymore. So you need to also kind of explain to the individuals when we ask you, you know, have you committed theft, that there is certain rand values perhaps to it. So everybody takes the pencil, everybody takes the stapler home, those kind of things. So you need to kind of be very specific in terms of what you're looking for. So when you're asking questions around data security, you know, was it for the purposes of fraud, not just for your petty theft kind of things? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Jean-Pierre's got a question. Go for it.
Thank you. Good morning. Just want to find out, when you guys deal with people that are known to have anxiety, do you guys have steps that you take to try and calm that person down in a case being that they potentially fail the polygraph when they are actually telling the truth?
Yes, definitely. That's a very difficult environment. So I've had individuals that are bipolar, that are on all kinds of different medications for these conditions as well. So the way in which we approach it is, obviously, you know, you need to let them understand what is the purpose of the test that you're performing. This is not a forensic evaluation or examination. You're not charged. This is just merely a risk management tool that you've got to go through. You've got to Do introductory discussions with these individuals as well. Explain to them exactly what the tools are that are going to be used, how it's going to be used, what it's going to be monitoring. Let them understand that, you know, it can't be influenced externally, that these sensors are going to read into a system that is a closed system that's going to give you a printout, can't be manipulated in any form or fashion. So they can start to familiarize themselves with the type of testing that's going to be done and how it's going to be done. And then normally with these type of individuals, I would be present as well. I'd have the conversations with them. I've had an individual that was you know, quite irate, was in tears, and we went down, sat down, calmed down. And then they determine a baseline based on their feelings, their condition at that stage. And from there, you have a look at your reactions from those baselines. We also have the EAP that is then available to individuals that feel that they have been traumatized by the experience. You need to be conscious of that also, and to allow these individuals to, you know, you're not going to polygraph somebody and chase them straight back to their desk and say, no, you go and work again. You know, you've got to have that coffee breaks, you've got to take them and have the conversations with them. And it's all about treating people ethically, properly, with respect, and maintaining the dignity through that, letting them understand the purpose of it. But yeah, in terms of medical conditions and anxieties, etc., I've had no issues with the actual results of that. All of these individuals, you know, that have had these anxieties have had a pleasant experience. Results have come through positive. We've done hundreds and hundreds of tests, and I absolutely cannot fault the polygraph in any way. Whenever we've had negative results, there's been a reason for it. I can't hear.
Sorry, any other questions? Has anyone got? I know we've gone over, but thanks. If there are no other questions, and thank you very much, William, for your time today. It's been really informative, really great, and I'm glad we got the recording for those people who didn't join us, because I think they missed out on a really good presentation. So, and fascinating, I've got to say. You know, I've never really thought of polygraph tests and things like that, but sounds pretty frightening. I hope I don't have to do one.
Next time you come visit,
I would hope to pass.
Absolute pleasure. It was nice presenting. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. And we will do a write-up and put the presentation on our website. So thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Lourens. Thanks, William.